Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome. My name is Mark Medeiros. I'm the manager of community engagement at Peninsula Open Space Trust. And on behalf of POST, thank you for joining us for today's webinar on living with rattlesnakes with Dr. Emily Taylor. Before we begin, it's always important to start off with an acknowledgement that the land in POST's working area has been home to many distinct communities of Native people since time immemorial. We work to conserve and care for these lands, the ancestral territory of the Ama Mutsun, Muwekma Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone, and Tamian Nation. These indigenous communities have survived centuries of displacement and are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. Wherever you are, please pause to acknowledge the Native people whose land you are on. And if you're already in chat, feel free to acknowledge their names in chat. And of course, welcome to any Native and Indigenous community members who are joining today. I want to pause and talk a little bit about POST as usual. For those of you who are less familiar with our work, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're going to show you this awesome animated map of our working area, showing all the land we've protected since our founding in 1977. It's about 80,000 acres at this point, the majority of which has been transferred to our public agency partners like Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, Santa Clara and San Mateo County Parks, state parks, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So a lot of the land we've protected has been opened up to the public for recreation and there for everybody to enjoy. And the way we've been able to do this work is through the support of thousands of community members like you. Many of you are watching today, and we want to say thank you, as always, for your continued support that's made this work possible. So today we're going to be talking about rattlesnakes. I love rattlesnakes. I'm from the South Bay. Some of you are on the peninsula. Of course, you see rattlesnakes up on the peninsula, but I really think of our South Bay preserves like Rancho San Vicente, Calero County Park. If you're headed further south, Coyote Lake area, Henry Co. as being awesome rattlesnake habitat. And we're in June now. It's hot, and it's a great time to run into rattlesnakes. Of course, you have to be careful. And so I know this particular species is really interesting to a lot of people. A lot of folks are scared of rattlesnakes, and we've found a wonderful person to talk all about rattlesnakes today. And her name is Dr. Emily Taylor. She's the director of physiological ecology of reptiles lab at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. She's a professor of biological sciences at Cal Poly, where she has been teaching and mentoring students in field-based environmental physiology research for 16 years. She's a super snake expert. She fell in love with snakes as an undergraduate at UC Berkeley, where she conducted research on the Baja California rattlesnake and wrote her senior thesis for her English major on the representation of the serpent in the Bible. So interesting. She next got her PhD in biological sciences at Arizona State University, studying proximate mechanisms responsible for sexual size dimorphism in rattlesnakes. And she's the founder of Central Coast Snake Services, which provides many services to local communities, including snake identification as well as capture and relocation, helps to reduce the likelihood of snake visits through property consultation and rattlesnake-proof fencing, to help protect residents and pets and livestock from negative encounters with rattlesnakes, provides all sorts of professional trainings related to this topic too. So very excited to welcome Dr. Emily Taylor to the program today. Hi, Emily, how are you?
Hey, Mark, I'm great. I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for making the time. And it sounds like you were already busy this morning, right? You're working on a fencing project?
Yes, we already installed a rattlesnake-proof fence here locally this morning. So summer's a busy time for us, very snaky.
Awesome. Yeah, and so everybody knows you're down in the slow area in Nipomo, was it? Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for making the time, and I know everybody's excited to listen to you. So with that, you could pull up your slideshow, and I'll let you know when you're all ready to go.
Oops.
There we go. It's looking good. So I'm going to turn it over to you to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Well, hi, everybody. Like I said before, I'm super excited to be here. And today I'm going to be taking you on a little journey through the world of rattlesnakes, focusing on the local northern Pacific rattlesnake, which is the only species of rattlesnake that you have in the Bay Area. I'm going to be taking a myth-busting approach to introduce you to their natural history. And then I'm going to be talking a lot towards the end of the talk about how to be safe in rattlesnake country. Because even though it's true that rattlesnakes do not want to have anything to do with us, negative interactions can be very, very serious medically. So I'm going to talk all about how to avoid having those negative reactions, negative encounters, and how to have only positive encounters with rattlesnakes. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so I founded Central Coast Snake Services in 2019 with two main goals. The first and foremost is to promote safety of people and their pets, also their livestock in areas with rattlesnakes. At the same time, this can have another benefit, which is to help the rattlesnakes. So I am a biologist with about 25 years of experience studying rattlesnakes, and I'm constantly amazed at the disconnect between what the snakes are actually doing in the wild versus what people think they're doing in the wild based on what we see on TV, which generally tends to sensationalize what rattlesnakes do. So my job here today is to tell you what they actually do so that you can begin to appreciate them possibly, or at least to understand them a little better. And in this case, education is power. Knowing what rattlesnakes do is going to help you to be more informed when you're in rattlesnake country and improve your safety and that of your pets. So like I said, I'm going to be taking a rattlesnake myth-busting approach. Anytime there's something that's dangerous or scary, then they can be subject to myths. So things like rattlesnakes or sharks or politics, right? We see a lot of myths surrounding things that might be tenuous. And it's true that when it comes to rattlesnakes, most of what you've heard is probably a myth. I like to think that if you heard a fact about a rattlesnake, there's usually some grain of truth to it, but then it has been blown completely out of proportion and distorted by someone who wants you to believe otherwise. So I'm going to tell you the science-based facts today. So I'm going to be going through this pretty quickly so that I can get a bunch of information in these next 40 minutes or so. And so please definitely leave your questions in the comments, and then Mark is going to give me some questions at the end. So the first myth is that rattlesnakes lay eggs. And so some of us may have seen these little envelopes, rattlesnake eggs that you give to someone, and they say, what? They open them after it says, caution, keep in a cool place to prevent hatching. And then there's a joke mechanism inside that makes a zzz noise when you open it up, and it scares people. A funny gag, but in fact, rattlesnakes don't lay eggs. No species of rattlesnakes lay eggs. They actually have live birth. And that's true of all rattlesnakes, including our local northern Pacific rattlesnake. So that's what you have in the Bay Area. Down here in Central California, down into Southern California, and into Baja California, I actually have Southern Pacific rattlesnakes. Where the border is between Southern and Northern Pacific rattlesnakes could be the subject of its own seminar. If anyone's curious about that, let me know via email. I can send you a little treatise that I wrote up about it. The point is, there's just the one kind in the Bay Area. They do vary a lot in coloration, though. So to talk about how rattlesnakes don't lay eggs, I wanted to tell you a little bit about their natural history and tell you about how they do reproduce. So very briefly, I wanted to go through a year in the life of a Northern Pacific rattlesnake. So in general, when we think about something like the summer right now, the summer is the time when rattlesnakes are most active, and they're doing two things. They're feeding, like we see here, and they're having babies. Let's start with feeding. So male rattlesnakes and female rattlesnakes who are having an off year, meaning that they're not reproducing that year, they don't give birth every year, they're all doing things like eating California ground squirrels to fatten up for the following year. And then in that fall, the males will find the females, as you can see with this very attentive male on the right-hand side. He will court her, and hopefully he will get her to mate with him, as we can see on the top right. So mating occurs 2 times per year. It occurs in the autumn and also in the spring. They then will start to go down into ground squirrel burrows or rocky outcrops. So either of those places are going to form the place where the snakes spend the winters. And this largely is going to be a time of hibernation for them. More inland in the Bay Area, you'll find them doing true hibernation, where they're underground from about November through February, and there's not much chance of seeing them at all. Closer to the coast, where you get more mild winters, then there's a chance of rattlesnakes actually coming out and basking during the day and being more active year-round. But no matter what, spring is always the biggest season for rattlesnakes. The rattlesnakes come out and we have the next mating season. So they're going to look for each other. They're going to mate again. And then the female rattlesnakes, if they're fat enough, they will ovulate during about May. They'll be pregnant in June, and they'll give birth in anywhere from July through September. So here we can see a female rattlesnake giving live birth. And I'm going to show you some additional photos of that, even a video coming up soon. I did want to finish with this picture up in the top left, which is actually a rookery, or a communal nesting spot for female rattlesnakes. Some female Northern Pacific rattlesnakes give birth on their own, and others are going to actually join up together and give birth in these rookeries. We'll talk more about that later on as well. So this is an ultrasound that we took here at Cal Poly of an early pregnancy female rattlesnake. What you're looking at are these large follicles, which are basically eggs that she keeps inside her body. Here's another one. All the white that we're seeing is the yolk, and then this tiny little spot right here is the coiled up fetus. And the fetus will actually draw the yolk into its umbilical cord and feed off of that. Look, we can see its beating heart of the tiny fetal rattlesnake right there, which is pretty amazing. Slowly over time, that fetal rattlesnake is going to grow as it sucks up that yolk. And by the time it's time for birth, there'll be no yolk left, and we'll have a big coiled up fetal rattlesnake ready for birth. This is what it looks like when rattlesnakes give birth. They don't just shoot out like little straight babies. They come out in their amniotic sac. They have little umbilical cords and placentas, just like people do. The mother, you could see her, she was just checking on her previous newborn as this one is coming out right now of its sac. And then it's inside the amniotic sac, it needs to break through. So it's going to slowly move around, trying to kind of hatch, so to speak. It doesn't have an egg shell, but it's almost like hatching out of an egg, to slowly come out and take its first breath. Right. So that's what rattlesnake birth looks like. And then one of the most interesting things about rattlesnakes is they're one of the very few snakes where the mothers have maternal care. This mother rattlesnake just gave birth. You can see that some of these babies are still in the process of coming out of their amniotic sacs, and she is coiled around them, being very wary of that photographer who's getting in her face. And she will actually stay with them for at least a couple of weeks, protect them from predators, and in general be a very good mother. Okay, so that was the first myth. And now I'm going to get into some more like human dimensions myths, some of the things that you may have heard and some you may not have heard. So this myth is almost like a 2-in-1. I was chased by a rattlesnake, and then I was chased by a 10-foot rattlesnake. The reason this is a myth is that rattlesnakes will not chase people. If rattlesnakes chase someone, or if it feels like it's chasing you, it's just because it's stressed out and it's trying to get somewhere, and you happen to be between it and where it's trying to get, like maybe the shade of a bush or something like that. Here in the Bay Area, rattlesnakes will never get beyond 5 feet, and they very seldom get beyond 4 feet. It's just human nature to overestimate the size of a snake. Even as biologists, we just see them as bigger than they are. However, especially true of people with less experience with snakes. And again, it's because of what we see on the internet. People are constantly pulling this maneuver on the internet, which gives us the idea that there's these enormous snakes because they look huge, don't they? Well, the one thing that all of these share in common is that these are an example of forced perspective, where the snake is being held out in front of the camera to where it's much closer to the camera than the person is. And we can just do a quick demonstration of forced perspective with this stuffed snake that's being held on a hook. It's only a few feet long, but when you hold it out to the camera, it looks enormous. So next time you see a photograph of a snake, do think about the perspective and know that Northern Pacific rattlesnakes are usually going to be about 2 to 3 feet long. The vast majority of the ones you see are going to be 2 to 3 feet long. And occasionally you might get a really big male, because the males are larger, that might be as big as 4 feet. Now, there are rattlesnakes that get bigger than that. Out east in Florida, we have eastern diamondback rattlesnakes that can get up to 8 feet long, although those are very rare to find. So, however, Northern Pacific's 3 feet is about average. Okay, one of my favorite myths to bust is that rattlesnakes are kind of laying in wait in nature trying to bite people. And again, I think this is really perpetuated by what we see on TV, because this is the kind of stuff we see, right? Everyone, even the nature shows that are purportedly not doing snakes on a plane, they're purportedly trying to show snakes what they're actually doing, really don't do a good job generally of showing that. And there's a reason why they don't do a good job, because what the snakes are actually doing is rather boring. They're sitting there curled up, not moving for many hours, sometimes even many days at a time. And these rattlesnakes will, contrary to popular belief, will not rattle to give away their location most of the time. So as an example, this rattlesnake was coiled up in front of his overnight burrow, and we were walking around doing field work and didn't even see him. And we almost stepped on him several times, and he never gave himself away. And that's because as an ambush hunter, this rattlesnake wants to sit there and he wants to blend into the background so that the prey that he's trying to eat, like California ground squirrels, don't see him and he can just grab them. In addition, he wants to blend in so that predators don't see him. He doesn't want to give away where he is by rattling, because then a hawk might hear it, or a bobcat or something like that. So in fact, rattlesnakes usually only rattle when they feel that they're very threatened. And sometimes they don't even do it then. We have many rattlesnakes that we've picked up with our snake handling tongs and they never rattle at all. They have personalities and they really differ. Some are cantankerous, some of them are really mellow. Anyway, what they're doing when they're sitting like this, coiled up, is they're not waiting to bite a person. They never want to bite people. The venom that they produce is, precious to them. They want to use it for their prey. And here's what rattlesnakes eat. The diet of the northern Pacific rattlesnake is dominated primarily by fence lizards. So western fence lizards are really common. You see the blue-bellied lizards all over your yards probably. Those are the primary food source for these baby rattlesnakes. As rattlesnakes get larger, they're going to move primarily to mammals. However, they do eat other things like birds. And I wanted to share this photo because of a neat fact about rattlesnakes, which is that most rattlesnakes are actually going to strike their prey and then let it go, and then eventually follow the scent trail to find the envenomated prey and eat it when it's dead. But they don't do it when it's birds. Rattlesnakes are smart enough to know that if there's a bird that they grab, if they envenomated the bird, it would fly away and they could never follow the scent trail on the ground to find it again. So they catch birds and they grab them and they hold onto them until they're dead and then they eat them. But again, the California ground squirrel is a favorite food of these northern Pacific rattlesnakes. They have a really complex evolutionary history that I would love to talk about, but I don't have enough time to do today. Always hit me up online if you ever want to hear about that. But suffice it to say that rattlesnakes eat lots of ground squirrels. Okay. That's what they want to use their venom for. Now, rattlesnakes also get eaten by other things. So badgers are a major predator of rattlesnakes. No one knows if badgers are potentially resistant to rattlesnake venoms, but our guess is they probably are. Other things eat rattlesnakes too. This is one of my favorite photos. We came across this snake that looks like she's in distress. It was a pregnant female rattlesnake, kind of upside down, and we didn't know what was happening. And then we looked deep into the bush behind her and we can see, oh my goodness, it's a California king snake. A big California king snake coiled up around, constricting that rattlesnake. So king snakes aren't venomous. They don't kill with venom. They constrict their prey, and they specialize on eating rattlesnakes. I mean, they eat everything. California king snakes eat lots of stuff, but they will eat rattlesnakes, and they are resistant to rattlesnake venom. And so we actually watched as this enormous California king snake ate a pregnant female rattlesnake that weighed about the same it did. This is amazing, folks. This would be like you eating a 150-pound hamburger without taking bites, without using any utensils, without having any hands, just shoving it down your throat. Pretty cool what these snakes can do. And then, of course, birds of prey are major predators of rattlesnakes. Birds of prey don't seem to be resistant to rattlesnake venoms, at least from what I know. So they'll do things like rip off the business end of the snake and then take that headless snake, which now is not dangerous, to their cute little babies for a nice sausage meal of a snake. So why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this to explain that rattlesnakes are forming a really important part of our food web. They're what we call a mesopredator, meaning that they are a predator of things like rodents, and keeping rodent populations in control are very, very important for supporting vegetation so that we don't have so many rodents that are going to eat down the vegetation to nubs. Also controlling agricultural pests like the California ground squirrel, who contributes to hundreds of millions of dollars of damage in just California alone to crop loss, infrastructure damage. They burrow into dams and destroy dams. I mean, they're a major pest species that they deserve to exist just like everything else, but the point is that rattlesnakes help keep them in a balance. But rattlesnakes are a mesopredator because they also get eaten by other things, by these top predators. So things like birds of prey, I've already mentioned bobcats and so on, but also mountain lions, foxes, bobcats, all those love to eat rattlesnakes. So they are an incredibly important part of the ecological food web. All right, so now we're going to move even further into human dimensions. So I told you that rattlesnakes don't want to bite people, but we all know that rattlesnake bites do happen when the rattlesnake fears for its life. So there's another myth that this is a deadly situation. So I want to start by saying rattlesnake bites indeed are a very serious medical situation. They could be deadly when not treated, but luckily there is good treatment for rattlesnake bites. So I want to talk a little bit about snake bite statistics and prevention. So there's about 8,000 venomous snake bites per year in the United States, and most of these are rattlesnakes. Some of these are going to be copperheads and cottonmouths, which are other pit viper snakes that occur further east, not in California. And these are a lot of bites, but in reality, only about 5 people die from these. These are usually going to be people who have adverse reactions to the venom or people who fail to seek medical treatment. So it shows you right away that our medical treatment, which because these bites can be treated with antivenom, is very, very good and can prevent a lot of deaths. Because elsewhere in the world, snakebite is what's considered to be a neglected tropical disease, where we actually have hundreds of thousands of people who are dying every year because of the fact that they do not have appropriate treatment in many places. And so rest assured that rattlesnake bites are treatable. About 15% of bites are dry bites, meaning no venom is injected. If swelling and pain occurs, that means that envenomation occurred, like we get in about 85% of the time, and that medical treatment should be sought promptly. And of course, the medical treatment is going to be exclusively via antivenin. So antivenin is something that is made either in sheep or in horses. There's 2 different brands on the market right now. They will take multiple species of rattlesnakes, copperheads, cottonmouths, inject those animals with tiny amounts of the venom. The animals' bodies produce antibodies against these, and then those are kept to administer to people that are envenomated by rattlesnakes. The issue with these is they're extremely pricey. So rattlesnake envenomations are not only a serious medical issue because of the fact that even if someone may not die, they may actually have serious damage to the envenomated limb, but they can be very financially serious too if people are uninsured or even underinsured. So as a quick example, here was a bite to a Boy Scout in Santa Barbara back in 2015. So this $150,000 that you're seeing right here is just the price of the antivenom. He was in the hospital for an extended period of time, and the total price for his medical bills was over $600,000. So we can see that this is actually incredibly serious. So rattlesnake bites are to be prevented at all times. They're all to be avoided at all times. Now, I'm here to tell you the majority of bites are preventable. The majority of bites are when people are messing with rattlesnakes. So prevention, don't mess with rattlesnakes is the first thing, right? So I'm not going to talk more about that. Don't mess with rattlesnakes. However, to prevent accidental bites, here's the things that you can do. So staying on trails is good, and avoiding tall grass. If you work in a job where you're in tall grass, invest in snake boots or in rattlesnake-proof gaiters that cover your calves. Keeping dogs on leash is really important. I didn't used to keep my dog on a leash, but now that I've been deeply in this community and reading this literature, I always keep my dog on a leash. You can do things like have rattlesnake aversion training for your dogs as well, which seems to work very, very well. But still, you want to avoid your dog stepping on a rattlesnake in the tall grass. Simply put, do not put your hands and feet where you can't see them. That's what's happening with most snake bites, is somebody will be barefoot at night stepping on a rattlesnake, or they'll be gardening and they stick their hand down. They don't see that there was a rattlesnake there. If you do encounter a snake that's out on a local trail or somewhere out in the wild, stay about 10 feet away, admire it from a distance, and walk around it. If it's blocking the trail, try to walk around it through the brush. If it's still blocking the trail and you literally can't get around it, then sometimes you can take a long branch and kind of poke at it and help it make its way off the trail. If your home is in snake country, there's a number of things that you can do to prevent rattlesnakes from sticking around if they pass through. I have an extensive amount of details about this on my website that I can point you to later, but the basics are you want to block off hiding spots like areas underneath sheds, for example. Crawl spaces are a huge rattlesnake problem if you have openings into your crawl space. Manage rodents, remove dense bushes. This year during the drought, please make sure you have no water leaks because the rattlesnakes are really after water. So that's really important. Bird feeders and water sources like fountains, pools, all those things. They're lovely things to have in our yard, but they attract rattlesnakes. And so people who have extended problems with rattlesnakes coming back to their yards can install rattlesnake-proof fencing. All right, so bites are rare, bites are serious. What should we do if we are bitten? So the answer is actually pretty simple. Don't do this. So you've heard a lot of myths about cutting the wound and sucking out the venom. Not only does that not work, it can actually introduce bacteria from the mouth into the wound and make it much worse. So it's actually pretty easy to learn what to do, which is to not do anything to the wound. So on the left-hand side, it basically says try to stay as calm as possible. Take off anything that might be constricting the area, like a ring or a watch. Position the affected area. It says at or above heart level. Recent research has suggested that we really should be above. We should be elevating the wound. And then really calling 911 and getting to the emergency room as quickly as possible. Don't do anything else. And that's why I think it's kind of easy to remember. Do no tourniquets, no ice or heat, no cutting and sucking. They have to say things like, don't use electrical therapy, because some people have decided that it was a good idea to attach themselves to their car batteries and turn on their car. I don't understand why they would think that would work. That one really gets me. But don't do that. Don't do anything. And then usually when I talk about this, people have the follow-up question, which is, well, what if I'm in a remote area and I do this and I don't have a cell phone signal, or I can't get to the, can't call 911, can't get to the emergency room. Well, the best thing to do is to prevent that from happening in the first place. So if you are in a remote area, if you are regularly hiking in remote areas, then you are flirting with disaster, because if you're by yourself hiking a trail hours away from help, there's a good chance that you may not be able to get out on your own. And so for people who do that a lot, I strongly recommend that you invest in a spot satellite messenger. This is something that is going to be a lot less expensive than a satellite phone, so that you can have it only in case of emergencies. And this will allow someone to be able to find you for a medical evacuation from anywhere on the surface of the earth. So definitely want to invest in one of those. In the event of a bite, very important that you go to the hospital immediately. But I also wanted to mention that the person who put together that previous graphic is a physician named Dr. Spencer Green. He's the head of toxicology at a hospital in Houston. And him and some other people have gotten together and formed this Facebook group called National Snakebite Support. And I feel like everyone who lives in rattlesnake country should join this group. It's also important for veterinary care too, so they'll help with animals. And the reason is that when you join the group, you'll have to swear that you'll never comment on anything. So you don't get to comment. It's not one of those kind of groups. It's a group where you get to learn, and where you have an opportunity where if you or someone you know, or your dog, or your horse were bitten by a rattlesnake or copperhead or cottonmouth, you would post the situation to this Facebook group, and they would immediately connect you with Dr. Green and with other physicians or veterinarians that are toxicologist specialists. And the reason this is really important is because of something that I've recently become aware by following this group, which I wasn't aware of before, which is that it turns out that the vast majority of physicians and veterinarians in our country are not experienced with snakebite and do not know how to properly treat it. And so to give you an illustration of this is just one of many posts to the National Snakebite Support Network that I've seen recently. Brandy posted this, and I got her permission to share this as a way of showing everyone else that many physicians don't know what to do. So without reading this whole thing, basically she was bitten by a copperhead on her foot. That's the snake we're seeing on the left. And they told her it was a dry bite, even though she felt faint, she felt like her foot was on fire, she had severe swelling. All of these things indicate envenomation. And so they wouldn't give her the antivenom. And I'm here to tell you this happens over and over and over. And so if you get on this network, the physicians will actually tell you what to do. They will call the ER physician in whatever hospital you're in, and they will be your advocate. And it's just a wonderful resource. I've seen them be able to, if not save lives, which they probably have, they've been able to potentially save the outcome, a better outcome for a lot of people who were envenomated and their pets. So highly recommend. Speaking of that, one of the biggest myths I ever get is that baby rattlesnakes are more dangerous than adults. This takes many forms. I hear people saying that their venom is more toxic. I hear people saying that they don't know how to control their venom, so they inject more. This is one of those ones where there's like a seed of truth, but most of it is false. So drop per drop, baby rattlesnake venoms actually can be more toxic because they have to take down lizards, not things like they don't have to take down rodents, right? However, there's no evidence that baby rattlesnakes cannot control their venom. That's a myth. And in addition, baby rattlesnakes inject far less venom, no matter what, than adults. And we actually have clinical data that I'm going to show you right here that suggests that bites from larger snakes are more severe. So taking you through this figure really quickly, we have patient mass down here on the bottom. So that's how heavy the people are. And snake bite severity score, which is basically going to be a conglomerate of all of the different symptoms. And we see in blue at the top, snake size is going to be the larger snakes. And so first of all, let me step back. All of the lines go down, which means that heavier people are going to have less severe bites. In other words, lighter people, like children, are going to have more severe bites. And that's probably a dilution effect, right? There's less of their blood and more venom, so they're going to have more of a severe bite. But look at this. For a patient of a given mass, a smaller snake, shown in red, has a much less severe snake bite than a medium snake, shown in green, or a large snake, shown in blue. So large rattlesnakes deliver the more severe bites. So that's a myth that is busted right there. And then this is the one I wanted to talk about a little bit more in more detail. So I don't know where this wood came on in the end there, so that's a typo. Sorry about that. But there's this myth that the world would be better off without rattlesnakes, so we should kill them for people's safety. And I want to take a little bit of time to go into that before I finish up and take questions from you all about interactions with rattlesnakes, because this one is a really tricky myth. So to begin this discussion, I would actually like to draw attention to this Nextdoor post that someone shared with me yesterday, who actually I believe is on this presentation right now. So this is from Cupertino, and this was in the Nextdoor app. And someone had posted that they saw a rattlesnake at Linda Vista Park, and you can see this is a juvenile rattlesnake. And they said that some workers helped them kill the snake because they felt that it was a threat to the many park goers that take their children and pets to the park. And so be careful. The husband was close to it when he realized it wasn't a stick. So once again, that really shows how the rattlesnakes aren't going to give up their spot. The rattlesnake was hoping these people wouldn't see it. And you can see why now, right? When people, just like many other predators, see a rattlesnake, they oftentimes kill it. And so a lot of this is based on misinformation, right? And so I want to really break down some of the logical fallacies in this. And I don't want to shame these people, though, because this is one of the most common points of view that we get, right? Which is that rattlesnakes can bite people. Therefore, we should get rid of the rattlesnakes by killing them, because then there won't be a rattlesnake anymore to bite people. I mean, it kind of makes sense at first, but really it's just a series of logical fallacies that I would like to myth bust right now. Before I do that, I wanted to point out that I went through all 489 comments that have still to this day been going on in this neighborhood in Cupertino. And there was a lot of really great comments by locals. So thank you to those of you who are listening right now who made these comments, including MS at the bottom, who said, "You did what?" A lot of people were curious, indignant even, that this happened, because they understand the importance of rattlesnakes in our communities, and furthermore, probably understand some of the logical fallacies in this person's argument, which I'm going to get to in just a minute. However, there was also a lot of misinformation in this thread. Even from well-meaning people, there was a lot of misinformation. So that's why I wanted to spend a little more time on this today, to really break down to people the intricacies of this issue about whether or not we should kill rattlesnakes. So I do want to recognize and acknowledge, first of all, that many people kill rattlesnakes when they come onto their own properties. Now, I actually personally believe that you don't even need to do that, and I'm going to explain why that is too. But I do want to mention that this was in a public park. And we had a similar situation here about a year ago, when in a public preserve, it's actually private land, but it's a preserve, so it's open to the public. Someone came in and killed a rattlesnake, and it sparked a huge uproar. It then happened down in Ventura County, and there's been a lot of arguments about people about, well, why should we keep this animal alive? It could bite people. So, all right, without any further ado, I'm going to finally get to it, because I think that this is something that is very, very nuanced and layered. All right, so this is the first issue. Just because they saw that one rattlesnake does not mean that that was the only rattlesnake there. Let me explain. There's lots of rattlesnakes around all the time. We are very bad at finding rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes are very good at hiding. They do not give away their location to us. So killing one rattlesnake does not change that. So in other words, it's kind of like an end-sum game. So they saw this rattlesnake, and the people probably assumed that a rattlesnake had wandered into the area. and that by killing it, they were then reducing the chances of someone interacting with that rattlesnake. But the truth is that rattlesnake was just happened to be visible because it was crossing that parking lot. There are dozens, maybe even hundreds of rattlesnakes all around. So actually killing one is not going to be making people more safe, because people need to be aware of them. That's the only thing that's going to make them safe. Killing one will not do that. The second thing that really bothered me about this was the reference to children. So this is nuanced, because we can tell people and we can train dogs to stay away from rattlesnakes, but kids are more tricky, because sometimes kids may not have their reaction time. They may not be as able to identify them. So it's a little bit more difficult to try to protect kids from rattlesnakes. Although I think that education goes a long way, I will say that. However, I do think that killing these snakes, which people oftentimes will do in front of their children, really sets a bad example about the value of wildlife. It shows kids that we have this power to just go ahead and kill these animals without even thinking about alternatives. And it goes along with this theme that we see throughout the country, where rattlesnakes are considered to be varmints or disposable wildlife, when in reality, we have this incredibly noble animal that does a lot for us. I've summarized some of that already in terms of controlling rodent populations and so on, but there's more yet to come in the talk about what they actually do. And in fact, for those of you who aren't aware, over in like Texas and Oklahoma, there's a number of annual events that are called rattlesnake roundups, where people go out and capture rattlesnakes using oftentimes very ecologically unfriendly methods, like pumping gasoline down into the burrows to force the snakes out, which also kills everything that lives down in those burrows, whether it be salamanders, rodents, insects, everything dies. The land dies and becomes poisoned for a long time. And they keep those snakes in, they keep them in horrible conditions. None of this is regulated at all, so no permits needed. And they then brutalize them, to be honest with you. They, in the name of education and collecting venom for anti-venom, none of which are true, by the way. Medical groups do not use anti-venom from rattlesnake roundups to make anti-venom. They will do things like, kill the rattlesnakes, and then they have the children come in and put their little hands in the blood and make handprints and then sign their name in the rattlesnake's blood on the wall. And I just don't get it. Even if you don't like rattlesnakes and you don't want to admire them, that's one thing. But like teaching your children to celebrate the deaths of these incredible animals, it's just irresponsible. So in my opinion, chopping the head off of a rattlesnake in a park, which is the rattlesnake's home, is paramount to the same thing. Okay, the third thing is that one thing that I noticed from this post here is that other options were not even considered. But this is likely to lack of awareness. So again, I don't want to shame this person too much, because this person probably thought they were doing a good thing. The fact that they actually posted on Nextdoor as like, look, people, I did a good thing, shows that they really didn't understand that there was an alternative. And OT right here at the bottom is the first person to have recognized that there is an alternative, which is you should have called someone to relocate it. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about rattlesnake relocation at the end of the talk today, but it's something that all of you in the Bay Area can do. There's never a reason to kill a rattlesnake, even if it's on your own property, because I am going to hook you up with people who you can call and they will come and relocate the rattlesnake for free, or if you're really nice, for a donation. So the final thing is actually the biggest one, which is killing a rattlesnake is actually incredibly dangerous. Leaving a rattlesnake alone, you're not going to get bitten by it. Engaging with a rattlesnake instead of leaving it to a professional to relocate it is extremely dangerous. Those of you who may have cut the head off a rattlesnake might say, well, I've done it before, it's fine. That's confirmation bias. Many bites happen when people actually are trying to kill the snake. Confirmation bias, I mean that like, oh, well, I saw it happen this one way this one time, so it's going to always be that way. Unfortunately, what a lot of people don't know is that rattlesnake heads can continue to bite for hours after they've been severed from the body. It's really ugly, messy, not good for anyone, including obviously the snake, and not good for the people. So here's an example of that, right? A Texas man decapitated a rattlesnake. It bit him anyway, and he nearly died, his wife says. This is what happens when people try to mess with rattlesnakes. Although I would like to help the journalist out a little bit by fixing their title a little bit, okay? So of course rattlesnakes bite. Rattlesnakes bite people when they're trying to defend themselves. So please consider not killing rattlesnakes. It's not good for anyone. It doesn't solve any problems. It sets bad examples for children, and you do have an alternative in the Bay Area. So we should not be killing these rattlesnakes, we should be celebrating from what they are, even if we don't want them to be in our yard, which is perfectly reasonable. By relocating them a short distance out into the wild, they can continue to play the important roles they do, not only in our food web, like I've described before, but there's these little hidden things that are on these rodents that we should be talking about too. Rodents tend to be carriers of various types of insects and arachnids that are vectors for very serious diseases, including things like Lyme disease. So indeed, rattlesnakes eat ticks. They don't eat ticks on their own, but they eat ticks because they eat rodents who are infested with ticks. And rattlesnakes collectively can eat millions of ticks if we consider the whole populations. Now, Lyme disease is a rising threat, especially up in the North Bay, very much so on the East Coast. And timber rattlesnakes are actually eating and therefore then killing a lot of these Lyme disease carrying ticks by virtue of the fact they eat these rodents. It's not just Lyme disease. The California ground squirrel, which is a major source of food for rattlesnakes, carries plague. Seriously, like the Black Death, the bubonic plague. It's endemic to California. People get it every year. The only reason that we're not getting a Black Death again is because we have antibiotics to control this. Okay. And then hantavirus, right? Hantavirus is carried by deer mice. The point is there's a lot of infectious diseases that rattlesnakes, by just doing their thing, help to keep in check. And then finally, I just wanted to end with this thing that I've sort of drawn attention to earlier, which is that when people really learn about what rattlesnakes do, sometimes it can make their heart become a little bit less grinchy and a little bit more tender. It can cause their hearts to grow, because in reality, rattlesnakes are not these horrific, biting, rattling beasts that we see when we tune into these wildlife TV shows that sensationalize everything for viewership. They're not even the beasts that we see on YouTube, which sensationalize everything for viewership. They're gentle creatures who just want to eat their rodents, hide, even hang out with babies. Look at this situation here. This little baby rattlesnake is curled up on this rookery on top of this mother rattlesnake, although there's a baby rattlesnake down there. This is not that little baby's mother. And I know that because this snake is still pregnant. I can tell by how big she is. She's actually taking care of right now. It's called babysitting one of her sister's babies while she goes off to hunt for the first time in a few months. Their social behaviors are incredibly complex. They have friends they hang out with. They have snakes that they associate with more than others, friends. They have family members. They tend to go to hibernacula and these rookeries to hang out with family members. We're just starting to learn about the social behavior of rattlesnakes. And when you think about them as these tender, caring mothers, to me, it makes it that much more difficult to just blatantly go out and just cut one of their heads off, right? These animals have a right to exist. They deserve to exist. They help us, but they also just have a right to exist in their own right. Baby rattlesnakes hanging out together. I wanted to add that picture on because it's just so incredibly cute. These babies will hang out with their mothers for about 2 weeks before they then shed and disperse nearby and start hunting for those first lizards of the year and hopefully put on some fat for their first winter. Okay, so clearly education is the way to go. When we see people like, especially little kids, being exposed to rattlesnakes early on, then those people tend to grow up to be much more accepting of snakes. When we have events, which we do constantly for outreach, and we introduce rattlesnakes, including Buzz, the buzzbutt, who's our outreach rattlesnake. We can see on the bottom over here. When we show him to children, it's usually the parents or the chaperones that are the most afraid. The children are super into it. And then these children are going to grow up to be better stewards of wildlife, better stewards of their environment. So please keep an open mind about rattlesnakes. Parents, keep an open mind because the children are picking up a lot on your body language and on your facial expressions when you meet or see these animals in the wild. So please do teach your kids to be appreciators of wildlife and enjoy wildlife. I do want to mention really quickly that down here on the Central Coast, we are having a World Snake Day event on July 16th at the Pismo Preserve, where last year we had about 200 kids, and this year we're going to have even more. So do look for World Snake Day events in your area and see if there's anything going on to have a chance for your kids to encounter rattlesnakes in a safe and controlled environment. So I just wanted to end with this very important piece of advice for you, which is along the education front. which is, so what should you do if there's a rattlesnake in your yard? And it has to do with this concept of relocation. So I'm going to take this through a couple different steps. It really depends on you and your yard. If you have a rattlesnake in your yard and you're live in a remote area surrounded by beautiful open land, first of all, if you live in the Bay Area and that's you, congratulations, you're very lucky. Secondly, then you may want to just consider leaving it alone. So the first thing you could do is admire your neighbor. She's likely only around temporarily. Rattlesnakes have large home ranges that they move around through, and groups like Advocates for Snake Preservation, on which I'm a board member, have a number of great resources about living with rattlesnakes, about coexisting with rattlesnakes. A lot of times when you learn that they're not going to come after you and bite you, then maybe you can come out there with your binoculars and watch them from 20 feet away and see what they're doing. And maybe you'll never see them again. But I do also recognize the fact that many people have kids, have dogs, are worried about rattlesnakes in their yards and do want those rattlesnakes to be relocated. Okay, well, there's a couple of things you can do. First off, if you want to, you can just spray the snake with a hose. She'll probably just crawl away. So get between the house and the snake, spray it on high pressure with the hose. It'll probably just crawl from the bushes. You'll never see the snake again. Okay. But if you do want professional relocation, then you can call someone to actually relocate the snake. And I wanted to specifically address relocation because that was something that came up a lot on the next door discussion, which was people talking about relocations and why they would or wouldn't work. Very important that relocations are short distance relocations. They should be relocated about a quarter mile to a half mile away into good habitat. So put them into a ground squirrel burrow or put them into a bush, or better yet, call someone who's a professional to do it. The snakes have a good chance of survival if you put them nearby. Some studies show that the snakes are more apt to return with you to your property if you do short distance translocation. But I've done research myself on this, as in not research online. I've actually done the physical research where we've experimentally done this with rattlesnakes in California. They don't return. Okay, so short distance translocation is better for everybody. Long distance translocation, taking the snake many miles away, is a huge no-no. Please don't do it. Doesn't tend to be a reason to do it. But again, usually your wildlife professional that you call is going to know how to do this. I also wanted to address on Nextdoor the idea about whether or not it was legal to relocate rattlesnakes. I did see some misinformation on there that I wanted to address. First of all, your wildlife professional must have a permit from the California Division of Fish and Wildlife to be able to actually relocate wildlife. So, for example, I have one for here on the Central Coast. However, you in your yard, if you wanted to just take a shovel and gently move a rattlesnake across the fence, or spray it with a hose, or even put it into a bucket safely and take it away, you are allowed to do that. So please know that that is true. You can relocate a rattlesnake from your yard, but you can't do it as a business or as even a volunteer service without having a permit. All right, so without any further ado, everyone take a screenshot of this. Here are your people who you need to call in your area. I reached out to all of the people who online are purported to be free rattlesnake rescue in your area. Some of them didn't return my calls. So these are the ones who did return my calls. I wanted to note that if you call animal services or the fire or police department, it really just depends. So I know, for example, one of my friends is a firefighter in Marin County and they will relocate the rattlesnakes, but maybe some of the other firefighters don't. So I'm really not sure what the situation is there. I do know that sometimes they do kill the snake. So it's much better to call someone who's actually a specialist on this too. I've talked to some of my firefighter and police personnel friends, and they're like, we really don't like to do this. Like, we're not the experts. We're experts in fires, right? So call a rattlesnake expert. Call Eli if you're in the South Bay. Eli says that he does Fremont and Mateo, south to Gilroy, and this is all free. Again, Eli, of course, appreciates donations. He says he'll even go further if people pay for the gas. J&W Reptile Rescue is out of Vallejo. They told me that they would go anywhere a 3-hour radius, and they also install rattlesnake-proof fencing up in the Bay Area. So please call these people instead of killing the rattlesnake, because there's no reason to kill a rattlesnake if someone can come and relocate it for you. Okay, this is my last slide. I did want to end with, if you forgot to write Eli's number down, because this is the talk to the South Bay, so I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to write his number down. It's in the top right there. I wanted to leave you with my contact info and my social media information for both my business, Central Coast Snake Services in the top left, where if you go to our website or contact me via email or text, right here is my phone number, then I can do snake identification for you. It doesn't matter if you're in the Bay Area. Just tell me tell me where you are. Anywhere, actually, even if you're in Panama and you're curious about the snake you see on vacation, if you're in Hawaii, well, you won't see any snakes in Hawaii because there aren't any. If you're anywhere in the world, you can send it to me and I will get it identified for free. And I do rattlesnake relocation advice for free. I have information on how to make your how to make your yard snake unfriendly. Or if you want to make it more snake friendly, you can just do the opposite of what I say in that article that's posted to my website. And of course, I do provide rattlesnake proof fencing from the very south part of the South Bay, south to Los Angeles. But you do in the Bay Area have your own rattlesnake fencing company in J&W Reptiles. So anything else snake related. One last thing before I continue on is that just this week we launched a new community science project called Project RattleCam on Zooniverse website. And so any of you who are rattlesnake enthusiasts, I would strongly encourage you to copy this down. This website right here is case sensitive, so make sure you use the capital R and the capital C. And it will take you to a website where you actually get to act as community scientists and help us understand rattlesnake behavior by analyzing photos that we took at rattlesnake rookeries in Colorado. Really excited about this new project, and so definitely follow it on social media if you want to see rattlesnakes in the wild. So that's it for me. I'm now glad to take some questions and answers, and thank you all for listening, and thank you for being, for relocating rattlesnakes and for admiring them and for not killing rattlesnakes.
Awesome, Emily. That was a lot of information. Very good. It's clear that you do this a lot. I was tracking all of our questions. I got to say, it's more than usual. You probably expected that because it's just such a popular topic. So thank you again for all that. So I'm going to try to do a good job on behalf of the community in getting through a bunch of these.
And just remember, everyone who's watching, if your question isn't answered, email me or text me. I love to talk about rattlesnakes.
Awesome. We're super lucky to have you in our area, Dr. Taylor. So let me do a couple that are about rattlesnake ecology, just rapid fire, filling in some gaps here. Well, about being territorial, are rattlesnakes territorial amongst themselves? Do you know, or they'll defend little territories? What's their territory like? You said they have a large area.
Yeah, so rattlesnakes have what we call a home range. We differentiate that as scientists from territories because territories are defended. So no snakes are actually territorial. They don't defend a space. It's just they just kind of hang out in a spot. And the home ranges overlap because they don't show territorial behavior or agonistic behavior. Rattlesnakes' home range size varies dramatically. Rule of thumb in California, coastal areas, is that a female rattlesnake may be only as big as about a football field, whereas a male rattlesnake may be about 5 times that big.
Oh, wow. That's big. And it's probably dependent on the availability of prey and that sort of thing.
A lot of different things, but it's in general, smallish area. So that's why we want to do only short distance relocation, because then they'll still kind of know where they are.
Gotcha. Another question about, I guess, related to territoriality and being defensive. Someone asked, do rattlesnakes who are pregnant act more defensive in any way, or is that not the case? Do we know that?
We don't really know. In my experience, I would say no. I would say that the degree to which one animal is really defensive versus another one seems to be more of a personality thing. So some of them are just really buzzy and some of them are super mellow, and it doesn't matter if they're males or females, or if they're pregnant or not. They just vary, just like us humans do, right? Right.
Okay. Cool. All right. So a lot of folks are curious about exactly what to do in terms of a rattlesnake bite, and understanding this is a little bit, there's a lot of hypothetical stuff here, like what should I do in this instance? There's probably a lot of details that are dependent. So one is like, okay, I'm walking alone and I get bit. What should I do? Should I walk slowly down the trail
Yeah.
or should I run down the trail?
Yeah. No, this is a very good question. Very good question.
Yeah.
The brief answer to that is that if someone is bitten, they should first of all call 911 and make sure that there's an arrangement where the EMTs like tell them where you are, you're on a trail. If you feel fine, you should slowly and calmly try to walk back towards the trailhead and be staying on the phone with 911 so that they know what's going on. If you start to, the issue is that many rattlesnake bites can overcome the person because the pain can be so severe. There also can eventually be neurological symptoms in some cases. In that case, if a person starts to feel ill, they should stop and sit in the middle of the trail where they're more likely to be seen by emergency personnel. Mm-hmm. So never run, never try to bike, never try to pump the blood through your body because it's going to accelerate the onset of symptoms that are dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things are dependent, I'm sure. You know, if you're in an area with cell service, that's one thing. Maybe then it's safe to just completely stop and call. Maybe you're in an area where there's a lot of foot traffic from other park visitors. That's like another factor. But the operating principle is just staying calm, moving slowly, that sort of thing. One little question here. Somebody asked about the northern Pacific rattlesnake. You may not know this, or I wonder if you know, but somebody asked says that maybe there was no human deaths ever by the northern Pacific rattlesnake. Do you happen to know if that's true or not?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I would be very surprised if there was none ever. I mean, well, of course there's, okay, step back. Logically, there have been some ever, because when we say human deaths, we're talking about like what happens to be recorded somewhere in the past, maybe 70 years. So clearly people would have, in the rich history we've had with rattlesnakes over thousands of years.
Yeah.
People living in California, there will have been people who were envenomated and died. I think the person's point, though, here is whether or not there was none or very few, is that it's very rare to die from a rattlesnake bite, including northern Pacific rattlesnakes, maybe even especially northern Pacific rattlesnakes.
Okay, there you go.
I don't know the statistics on how many bites there, how many like deaths there have been in recorded history.
Gotcha. You know, I know that's a harder one. So, a couple about snake identification. You know, it's obviously easier if you see their head or their tail. You know.
Oh, you're talking about the gopher snake versus rattlesnake question?
Yeah, gopher snakes versus rattlesnakes, or you know, if you can't see their head or tail, what's a way to key them? Any tips there?
So really great question. I'm glad someone asked this. So I do a lot of snake safety trainings for individuals that I teach people how to tell apart all the different common snakes and so on. There is misinformation online about this. So the only way to tell for sure, if you're not used to looking at the scales, is the tail. So gopher snakes are going to, and most other species of snakes are going to have a pointy tail. It goes off to a total point. Whereas rattlesnakes are going to have the rattles on the tail, or sometimes the rattles can break off, but they're going to have a stubby tail, right? Mm-hmm. That's definitely the best way to tell. The head is tricky because for most people that means head shape. And rattlesnakes do have a triangular head. Gopher snakes have a more streamlined head, but when a gopher snake is feeling threatened, it can stretch its head out and its head can become very triangular. Gopher snakes also like to rattle their tails in the leaf litter, as do many other species of snakes, like king snakes when they're upset. And so some people who call me saying, I have a rattlesnake in my yard, it's rattling its tail. That doesn't mean anything. It has to actually have a rattle on the end of its tail to be a rattlesnake. Okay. So the best thing you can do is to go on to CaliforniaHerps.com, which is the website for all things reptiles and amphibians in California. So again, that's CaliforniaHerps, HERPS.com. And look at a bunch of photos of gopher snakes and rattlesnakes and start learning those. If you're ever not sure about what something is, take a snapshot, text it immediately to me at 805-401-0811, and I'll tell you what it is. You can start learning that way. Even if you see one out in the wild, you're not worried because it's in your yard. You just want to know. I love IDing snakes. It's fun.
That's great. And, you know, just as we're wrapping up here, because we're getting to the top of the hour, I mean, like many of you who are watching, I've been hiking my whole life, and I remember it's been kind of like a change in my feelings as I've encountered rattlesnakes. Where when it first happened, I was like super scared. To now, it's been so many times that I've seen them. I just know, like, okay, there's a rattlesnake over there. Totally fine. Gonna leave it alone. What in terms of IDing the snakes and what to do about the snakes, it's the same with other wildlife. Just to leave them alone, give them some space, and there's no reason to worry. Look at where you're walking and stay on trail, because that's good for our local preserves anyways. Since we have so many people around here, it's better to stay on trail. And if you're on trail, there's a good chance you'll see them with plenty of time to just avoid them. So I really enjoyed hearing that you studied the mythical representation of serpents in the Bible, because it's so ingrained in us, and it makes sense to be fearful with serious risks. But it's so in our culture that we have a big prejudice against them. And I really appreciate you for taking the time to explain this to everybody. And
really briefly, yes, I know we have to finish. The cool thing
Yeah.
about that Bible study that I did, I said Bible study, it wasn't a religious issue. It was just analytical how they're portrayed. There's positives about how they're portrayed, and there's negatives. The Bible is very, very ambivalent, right? Because it was written by so many people over so many years, and that really is a symbol of how we feel about them today. They're extremely dangerous to us, but they're incredibly wonderful for us in an ecological sense too. And so there's this balance that we have to maintain. As long as you're safe and watch them from afar, you shouldn't need to worry about their danger.
That's a wonderful way to end. Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Taylor. Thanks for all of your work, for sharing your personal, info for people to be able to contact you. Again, centralcoastsnakeservices.com if you'd like more information. And we'll try to compile some of the resources that you shared into the follow-up email for folks to enjoy. And so with that, thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you again, Emily. And we hope you all have a nice weekend out there. Watch out for the snakes. Be nice to them. See ya.